Russia investigation. First, it was Jared, now Ivanka. What did Ivanka Trump know, and did she disclose it? Some Democrats are now calling on the FBI to review what the first daughter put on her security clearance application when she joined the administration as a White House advisor. This comes, of course, amid the ever-evolving explanations coming from her brother and the changing disclosures, updated disclosures coming from her husband after their meetings with Russians. Let's go to CNN White House reporter Jeremy Diamond, who is following this side of the story. Jeremy, what is the basis at this point for these calls from Democrats to look into Ivanka's security clearance?
Well, Congressman Don Beyer, a Democrat, is leading a group of 22 Democratic members of Congress calling on the FBI to review Ivanka Trump's security clearance application for potential omissions. The omissions they're talking about are in particular about foreign government contacts. That's a part of the application, and it not only asks that you disclose your foreign government contacts, but those of any immediate family members. Cue Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., who, of course, we learned last week had this meeting in June 2016 with a Russian lawyer who Donald Trump Jr. believed was representing the Russian government to provide dirt, essentially, on Hillary Clinton. So let me just read you a part of this letter from Congressman Don Beyer and these 22 Democrats. It says, "We are concerned that Ivanka Trump may have engaged in similar deception. The high standard to which we hold public servants, particularly senior advisors to the President of the United States, requires that these questions be raised and promptly answered." So Democrats have turned up the heat on Jared Kushner, calling for his security clearance to be revoked. Now they're also turning up the heat on Ivanka Trump. The White House and Ivanka Trump's attorney have yet to respond to CNN's request for comment. Kate?
All right, so you have that. And there's now also more coming out about the eighth person who attended the meeting with Donald Trump Jr. at Trump Tower and his links to a congressional investigation. Not just a congressional investigation, but a federal investigation into Russian money laundering. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. Well, we found out just recently that Ike Keveladze is the eighth person who attended that meeting. And Keveladze was actually previously linked to a congressional investigation. He was linked to bank accounts, essentially, that were being investigated by a congressional panel with regards to money laundering. Keveladze has denied any connection to money laundering efforts at the time. He called the GAO, the Government Accountability Office's investigation, a witch hunt. Familiar words that we're hearing now today again from the President of the United States, of course. But Senator Carl Levin, a Democrat who was on that congressional panel that was investigating that, has just put out a statement on Facebook. Let me read it to you in part. He says, quote, "As GAO reported, Keveladze established some 2,000 U.S. corporations and bank accounts for a number of them. The owners of those accounts then moved some $1.4 billion through those accounts. Keveladze claimed he did all this without knowing for whom he was doing it." And Carl Levin also goes on to call Keveladze, in a sense, the poster child of that practice of money laundering. So clearly some more questions being raised about Keveladze, who is the eighth person in that room with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort during that meeting at Trump Tower. Kate?
Very interesting. Jeremy, thanks so much for bringing it to us, laying it out. I really appreciate it. Joining me now on this to discuss is former U.S. Attorney Michael Moore, joining me now. Great to see you, Michael.
Good to see you, Kate.
So let's talk about that. This eighth person in the room, Keveladze, from that now infamous 2016 meeting, he's identified and he's being linked to this federal money laundering investigation. This was back in 2000 when this was all being investigated. Is Robert Mueller going to be looking into this?
You know, I think Bob Mueller actually will look into a lot of it, and these investigations take a long time, and some of this information will start to come out as that goes on. Hopefully not a lot. We don't want to have leaks in the investigation. But the problem with these explanations about the meeting, it's kind of like those little dolls that the Russians have that have, you open it up and there's another doll inside, and open that up, called a babushka doll. You know, that's sort of how this is. Every time we look into the meeting, we start investigating, we pop the top off and look in, another little Russian pops out. And that's where we are. The real problem, too, with the meeting is it's essentially a time when we gave the communists a win, gave Putin a win, both in the PR and in the counterintelligence world. I don't know what the administration was expecting when they were having this kind of meeting. You know, I don't know if they thought maybe that Putin would ride up in a 1947 tank wearing a fur hat and jump out at Trump Tower. But, you know, they send people in to set these things up. And essentially what we've done, or what the Trump team did, is they set up the administration for the potential for blackmail and extortion going down the road.
Well, let's focus, though, on one more time. I have another question on this eighth person in this investigation that we're now just learning about. I mean, the investigation looked at hundreds of U.S. bank accounts that were set up for corporations tied to Russia. More than $1 billion was funneled through them. And former Senator Carl Levin, he said that, as Jeremy laid out, that this guy became, in essence, a poster child for this kind of money laundering practice. He was never charged. He was never charged in this. But how serious is this?
Well, it's serious anytime you link somebody's name with potential money laundering. Obviously, that's a federal violation. And, you know, it's especially serious since we don't have tax returns from the president to look to see if maybe he had interest or dealings with some of these corporations that were set up. Those things can tell us a lot, too. So, you know, the web continues to get thick, and we're just not getting the information from the administration that we need. And for some reason, they seem to be particularly protective and interested in having these ongoing discussions with the Russians.
On Bob Mueller, Dianne Feinstein, Senator Dianne Feinstein, she's the top Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee. She has said that Mueller has given them on Judiciary, given them the green light to bring in, to ask to bring in Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort to get them to testify about this meeting we've been talking about.
Right.
Can you read anything into that, Michael, about the investigation that Mueller is doing?
Sure.
That he is okay with them testifying?
Yeah, my guess is that he's probably got information from a cooperating source, and he may already have the information he needs about the meeting and is now willing to see whether or not statements come out that are contrary to what he thinks he can prove from other evidence. So, you know, if he was in the midst of wondering whether or not there was some nefarious intent in having the meeting, I doubt he would have given his okay. But at this point, my guess is maybe it's from Mike Flynn, maybe it's from somebody else. He's got information about what the intent was behind that meeting, probably well beyond even the emails that we've seen from Don Jr.
Well, we will stand by to find out. Great to see you, Michael. Thank you so much.
Thanks, now.
Coming up for us, new backlash and questions after we learned the president met with Vladimir Putin a second time at the G20 summit. Why didn't he bring another American with him? Any official? Any translator? And why didn't anybody know about this until now? I'll speak live with one former ambassador who says Putin's goal was just that, to get the president alone. Plus, the Russian lawyer at the center of the Trump Tower meeting says she will testify, but on one condition. That's ahead. And we're just getting word President Trump will be speaking any moment at the first meeting of the voter fraud commission that he set up. It's been embroiled in controversy since it began. You're looking at live pictures of the room. We'll bring you his comments live when they happen.
Election integrity is set to meet for the first time today. 4 top Democrats are calling on the commission's vice chairman, Chris Kobach, to step down. They actually wrote a letter to the Vice President Mike Pence, who's overseeing the commission, yesterday, saying Mr. Kobach has repeatedly claimed falsely that widespread voter fraud exists and advertises his work on the commission to promote his own campaign for governor of Kansas. If true, that could be a violation of a statute. These actions undermine the integrity of the commission and raise significant concerns the commission will be used as a tool for voter suppression. Chris Kobach joins us now. It's good to have you on the show again, sir. What is your response to the criticism?
My response is it's ridiculous. First of all, they allege that somehow I'm not qualified because I've pointed out widespread voter fraud in my own state of Kansas. We're litigating our proof of citizenship requirement when you register to vote. And we've presented to a U.S. District Court 128 cases of non-citizens who've gotten on the voter rolls, and we've presented lots of other evidence or who have attempted to get on the voter rolls. And I'm simply saying that in my state, we have discovered a problem, but no commission has ever looked at it from a nationwide perspective. And so the other thing they claim is that somehow a commission studying this issue results in voter suppression. So to try to decipher that for you, I think they're saying that if a commission studies the problem in Washington, D.C., somebody out in California is going to decide not to vote some November. It doesn't even make sense. And in their letter, they don't even explain what is really a ludicrous argument.
They are... They're making their case. Of course, there's politics here, but I think that the general assertion is that you are looking for a problem in the name of suppression, and they're targeting you because you've tangled on this issue before with the ACLU and, frankly, recently lost. And you said more than that there were issues in your own state. You said, I think the president-elect is absolutely correct when he says the number of illegal votes cast exceeds the popular vote margin between him and Hillary Clinton. There is no basis for that, in fact.
Well, that was back in January or so when the president had made a statement similar to that. And my point was that, as I explained, if you took the quote in context and you read what was said before and after that, I was pointing to a study from the 2008 election that showed that several million non-citizens actually voted in that election. And I said it's conceivable if the same percentage in 2008 voted again today or in 2016 that you could have a similar result. So I was simply showing it was plausible.
The quote is
that's
inaccurate. I think the president-elect is absolutely correct when he says the number of illegal votes exceeds the popular vote margin between him and Clinton.
The point is that if you put it back in context, and then I went on to say there was a study that showed, and then I said if the same percentage of non-citizens in 2008 voted in 2016, then potentially you could have that issue. But let's make it clear. The commission is not set up to prove or disprove President Trump's claim. The commission is simply to put facts on the table. So if, as the Democrat members of Congress who wrote that letter contend there is no voter fraud, then we will make their case for them because the commission will come up with nothing. So the idea that you should stop the commission from even looking at a problem because there's going to be something we don't want the American public to see, that's outrageous. Let's just put the facts on the table, and you can decide, Chris. Because, Chris, let's say that the facts come out, and there are 1,000 cases of voter fraud in the whole country.
But what facts are going to come out? I mean, you are getting criticized because the information you're asking for either was seen as being overreaching or, according to experts, you couldn't find out whether or not there's a problem with the information you're asking for. You'd need other data to do a real analysis.
Okay, so let's be specific, Chris. The information we asked for is the publicly available voter rolls. You can walk in off the street in New York and ask that in your state. Any person watching can walk in to a county election office and ask for that. It's publicly available. The reason you need that information is to do things like if someone comes before the commission and says 100 people voted in this state in this election year, and we believe they were deceased at the time the ballots were cast. We can look at the voter rolls and say, well, those people weren't actually registered in that state at that time, so your claim is false, sir. You have to
But those secretaries of state are already saying they know that. They've done it within their own states, and they don't need you to certify their findings.
As a Secretary of State, I'm very familiar with what other states have done, and most states have not actually done an in-depth investigation of voter fraud in their state. Part of the reason we have in Kansas is, as you mentioned, we are fighting the ACLU in multiple court cases to keep our proof of citizenship requirement in place.
Right, and that's what is fueling the concern, right, is that that's who you are, and that's what you want, is to change the requirements to voting to require people to show proof of citizenship, and that they're concerned that that's what you're using this commission to do, to advance your agenda of what could be construed as voter suppression.
Well, you forgot to mention another thing, Chris, and that is it's a bipartisan commission. So it's 6-5 Republican Democrats.
But you don't have a Democrat vice chair alongside you, should you?
The commission doesn't have two vice chairs.
Should it?
It's perfectly normal. I only have one vote. It doesn't really matter. The total number is what matters.
But it would help to show that it's more bipartisan, and it's not unusual to have two different party members at the top of a commission.
Put it this way, Chris, the most senior member on the commission is the longest-serving Secretary of State in America, Bill Gardner, a Democrat from New Hampshire. The commission has got some of the most respected experts on this issue and on election administration. But the bottom line is all we're doing is looking for facts. We'll put those facts on the table. You can look at them, Chris, and say, you know what, that doesn't prove anything. That's not why.
I think that data can be a tricky thing, and people can use it to make different suggestions that is a function of what they want as much as what the numbers show. I think that's the concern, especially with the information you're asking for. Again, it matters that experts who look at data analysis and voter registration efforts and are behind these studies that you quote, and by the way, as we both know, the study that you're pointing to, the guys who own the data came out and said this study is bogus for legal votes, that they should not have drawn these conclusions off my data. So the concern is you're not going to have the data to draw a conclusion except the one that you want to draw, which may feed your voter suppression efforts.
No, so you make a good point. There are studies out there that do sampling. So that one study was based on interviewing voters, calling them on the phone and asking them, are you a U.S. citizen? Yes, no. Did you vote in the 2008 election? Yes or no. Now, and then they sample, several thousand people, and they draw a conclusion from a sample. You're right. Experts will always dispute whether that sample is good enough to draw conclusions. This commission is going to be looking at real figures, real numbers, real voter rolls, and real cases, not just doing surveys. That's the big difference. Well, there's never been a nationwide commission to actually look at real cases of voter fraud, look at real instances. So, for example, the Pew Foundation has sampled and has concluded that there are more than 1.8 million deceased people on the voter rolls. And they acknowledge that that is probably a low estimate, but it's just an estimate. Wouldn't it be better if a commission were able to get some real hard data and not just make an estimate, but actually present some real numbers? That's what we're talking about here, is just presenting numbers so the American people can decide. And we can come back and have a discussion a year from now, and you can say, Chris, I draw different conclusions than you do. And that's fine. But let's at least put some numbers on the table. And you know, there's so much debate about this issue. Why wouldn't we want more facts on the table?
Well, I don't know that there's any debate about whether or not 3 million people voted illegally in the election.
No, about the issue of voter fraud. No, about the issue of whether voter fraud affects elections.
Again, the reason I don't think the word a lot of debate over it is because we don't have any factual basis for saying that there is a problem with illegal voting in this country. It has never been seen as a scale that would be relevant on any level, except when one person, named President of the United States, Donald Trump, said it's why he lost.
Well, I've studied this issue a lot. I've told you the 128 cases in Kansas. Anytime you have a close election and if you have one or two non-citizens voting, it can swing that election. There was a case in North Kansas City, 2010 primary election, won by one vote for a state legislative seat on the Missouri side of the state line, Rizzo versus Royster. Mr. Rizzo won by one vote, but it was alleged that more than 50 Somali nationals voted in that election in sworn affidavits from the poll workers in that election.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the case.
So there are many cases where a close election can be swung by a few fraudulent votes. And I think as someone who's charged with admitting string elections and as someone who's an American and cares about our system, why wouldn't we want to minimize the chances of elections being stolen, of your vote being canceled by an illegal vote, or my vote being canceled by an illegal vote, someone who's not qualified or who's voting fraudulently for some reason. That's all we're trying to do.
We'll see what the commission comes up with. I'm just saying there are bigger concerns than illegal voting that this commission could be looking at, like Russian interference. So we'll see what you come up with, and we're always welcoming you on this show to discuss what matters.
All right, take care.
All right, Chris Kobach, thank you very much. There's a lot of news, including the latest in the battle over health care. Is there a way forward to make sure that your health care is safe? Let's get after it.
The White House says President Trump had a second undisclosed conversation with Vladimir Putin.
What the hell is Donald Trump's obsession with Vladimir Putin? Why won't he be straightforward about it?
It's a little extreme for us to somehow make this into a conspiracy.
We're also learning the identity of the eighth person in Don Jr.'s Trump Tower meeting.
It's very disturbing. It's taken us this long for this kind of information to come out.
We'll just let Obamacare fail.
That's just heartless. We're talking about real people here.
I regret that the effort to repeal and immediately replace will not be successful.
This is a real Mitch McConnell failure.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your New Day. It is Wednesday, July 19th, 8 o'clock in the East. Up first, the White House downplaying reports that at the G20 summit, Mr. Trump and Vladimir Putin had a second undisclosed meeting. The president reportedly had an hour-long conversation with the adversary without any American officials present and no official record of what they discussed.
In just hours, President Trump is going to host all 52 Republican senators for lunch at the White House. This comes after the president said he wants to, quote, let Obamacare fail after the Senate health plan's humiliating defeat. We have it all covered for you. Let's begin with CNN's Joe Johns live at the White House. Joe.
Good morning, Chris. That first meeting, that 2-hour meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin caught the attention of the world, and now we know it wasn't the only time the two men spoke face to face. The White House confirming a second encounter at the G20 after reports of it surfaced in the news media.
President Trump lashing out, calling coverage of his previously undisclosed second meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin sick and alleging it's been made to look sinister. A senior White House official tells CNN the discussion on the sidelines of a G20 dinner lasted nearly an hour and no other U.S. officials were present. Ignoring protocol, the president relied on a Russian translator, leaving the U.S. with no official record of their conversation. The White House down downplaying the second encounter, asserting the insinuation that the White House has tried to hide a second meeting is false, malicious, and absurd. This new revelation, the latest in a string of undisclosed meetings between Trump associates and Russians.
This kind of private meeting is virtually unprecedented in the diplomatic world. There seems to be a pattern of reckless or willful concealment of contacts with the Russians.
This meeting coming to light as CNN learns new details about the 8th person in attendance at the June 2016 meeting where top Trump aides hope to get damaging information about Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. That man, Ike Kaveladze, seen behind the president in 2013 in this exclusive video obtained by CNN, is a senior vice president at a real estate development company run by Russian oligarch Aris Agalarov, who has ties to Putin.
There was absolutely no conversation between either Agalarov and the Russian prosecutors or the Russian government about Hillary Clinton or the U.S. campaign ever. Didn't happen.
According to his attorney, Kaveladze believed he was attending a meeting as a translator for a Russian lawyer, despite the fact that she brought a translator with her. In 2000, Kaveladze was linked to U.S. bank accounts that came under congressional investigation for possible money laundering on behalf of Russian brokers. He was not charged.
This individual who's at least had a colorful past, if not a potentially criminal, it is very strange to me that this meeting that was supposed to be originally was related as 3 or 4 people about Russian adoptions.
Also this morning, CNN has confirmed that Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, who met with Donald Trump Jr. last year, has offered to testify before the United States Senate in order to clear up what she has called hysteria over the situation. Meanwhile, Senator Dianne Feinstein of California has told CNN that the special counsel, Robert Mueller, has given the green light for 2 witnesses to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee. That would be Donald Trump Jr. and the former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, though there's no clear note on exactly when that's going to happen. Back to you, Chris and Allison.
Thank you very much, Joe, for all the reporting. Let's bring in our panel now to discuss it. We have CNN political analyst David Gregory, senior Washington correspondent for Politico.com, Anna Palmer, and CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large Chris Cillizza. Chris, I know you've just written a piece for CNN.com saying that what President Trump appears to be doing with this second meeting with Putin, previously undisclosed, is a bait and switch. How is it, Chris Cillizza, that it has been more than 10 days, and in this age of all information all the time, we did not know that he had this possibly hour-long meeting with Vladimir Putin?
Well, one, because the White House didn't disclose it, but second, because, Allison, as you rightly note, all information all the time means you miss some things, right? I mean, it's just hard to see everything that is out there. But I do think what you're seeing here is really some classic Donald Trump misdirection, taking a story which is the White House, Donald Trump met with the Russian president with no other, or huddled with, or had a sidebar with, choose your word, at a G20 dinner with the Russian president with no U.S. translator and no other U.S. official present. We didn't know about it, as you rightly point out, for 10 days after it happened. And now Donald Trump is trying to turn the story into a media story, that the media is sick, his word, and that we're twisting things around. That it's not a media story. It's a story about a meeting we didn't know about prior with a foreign adversary that we know through our intelligence agencies meddled in the 2016 election. That's a story. The fact that the media is reporting on it is what we do. The fact that Donald Trump is trying to change the subject is what he does. It will work for a certain segment of people, but that doesn't make it right. It doesn't change the facts here, and the facts here are very clear.
And what's fueling it is the unknown. Why do we care about the meeting with Putin? Because there's an odd softness to the disposition of the United States versus a known inimical government agent in Vladimir Putin. We just had the former head of the Office of Government Ethics say that Trump's lawyer didn't want the president to sign his financial disclosure form certifying that it was accurate. I mean, can you believe that? I mean, and with these questions about, well, what financing does he have for many Russian banks? Why did they want to seek out his son to talk about their money? And that's what talking about the Magnitsky Act, a best reading of what that meeting might have been about. That's about Putin's money being tied up. Why do they keep seeking out all these Trump folk?
We don't know what the financial relationship is between Donald Trump and his business and the Russian government.
We don't know. Even Walter Schaub just said that not only did the president not want to sign it, eventually he did sign it, but that after reviewing it, they still didn't know what they were dealing with.
And were there loans? I mean, is he leveraged by the Russians in terms of loans that the business has gotten? We don't know that. Put it back into the realm of substantive policy. It is dangerous to go into a meeting with an adversary where there's an agenda that we don't know about, particularly given this president and his administration's record. They have not been truthful about contacts with Russia in the campaign. There's more that's being revealed. It is suspicious when the president appears to be coddling Vladimir Putin as he did as a candidate and now as president. And the thin nature of his protest with regard to interference in the election amounted to, well, I asked him if he did it. He denied it twice. I brought it up a second time. What am I going to do? Get into a fist fight? It's not acceptable. So from a substantive point of view, look, I covered the White House. You want to know what the president's doing. Don't hold out. He was on Air Force One holding forth about everything he's doing in the White House and doesn't say, look, yeah, I met with him 2 hours and we had a separate conversation. What did you talk about? Just be accountable. Let's know what you talked about. And there's no question that he wants to develop and use personal chemistry in relationships. This is not the leader of Montenegro, right? This is Vladimir Putin. This is a dangerous game he's playing. He's not telling us about it.
And by the way, Anna, the world leaders who were at the G20 found this tete-a-tete publicly with President Trump, President Putin to be peculiar. Right. So here's what the New York Times reporting says. The dinner discussion caught the attention of other leaders around the table, some of whom later remarked privately on the odd spectacle of an American president seeming to single out the Russian leader for special attention at a summit meeting that included some of the United States' staunchest, oldest allies. What's the big picture here to you, Anna, in terms of where this relationship and this transparency and these Russian threads are?
I just think this is another example of Donald Trump taking a very different tack than his predecessors. And clearly you have a lot of allies who are concerned about it. And, you know, there's a lot of geopolitical things happening right now, North Korea, other things where the U.S. is going to need other foreign leaders on its side. And if they think that, you know, Donald Trump is buddying up to Vladimir Putin, that's not a good thing for those kind of relationships to move forward.
I mean, look. Just look at the checklist, Chris Cillizza, of how this all started and how we got to this point. You know, do you want to release your taxes? No. Why? Because I'm under audit. We don't even know if he is under audit. How about your financial disclosure? It's all there. It isn't all there. Now we know that his lawyer didn't want him to sign a disclosure form certifying that it was accurate. We know that at least 2 of the people at this meeting with Donald Jr. Had some connections to activity that is a little dangerous, right? Yep. This 8th person now identified as someone that former Senator Carl Levin says they were looking at for money moving through thousands of shell corporations, over $1 billion. Why were they targeting him? That's how we got to this, the lack of disclosure, the lack of transparency, and the outright lying about what did happen.
That's right. Context. This sidebar with Putin didn't happen in a vacuum. Right? There's been a lot here. The most recently, the revelations about the Donald Trump Jr. meeting in the summer of 2016. So this is not an isolated incident. The other thing I would say, just from a human nature perspective, what Donald Trump is essentially doing is he's got a box, right? And he essentially says, nothing to see here. This box isn't important, but he always keeps it with him. People are like, what's in the box? He's like, nothing. It's not important. No need to see anything in here. No box. But he's always got it with him. This is the problem. At some point, you've got to open the box and say, see, there's nothing in it. You can't just say, take my word for it. Everything in my financial records are great. It's perfect. David Gregory keeps making this point, the exact right point, which is you can't continue to say, everything's fine. Take my word for it. Take my word for it. Take my word for it. When your word has repeatedly not been borne out to be right.
What Trump wants is to pull off some coup with Putin, some agreement to break some new ground. But all you have to do is look back at the past 2 presidents who actually used, all the expertise that was surrounding them, unlike Trump, And they were confounded by Putin as well. You've got to be careful, and I think you have to have some distance from this leader in order to really faithfully formulate U.S. policy toward it.
Well, look, Anna, very quickly, his supporters, the White House, point to the Syrian ceasefire as success. This is what happens when you speak to Putin. You can actually come together with some agreement that works for the U.S.
Yeah, I think they see this as, you know, kind of him doing business the Trump way. They defend it very aggressively. I think the problem is, to David's point, that oftentimes what happens is what he says, you know, didn't happen, then the story changes 5 times later, and so it's hard to have a lot of credibility when they go to the press and say, no, there really isn't anything that was happening here. You know, so that's going to be the biggest problem, I think, as this continues to unfold.
And the nature of what's actually happening on the ground in Syria is also very soft information, so we don't know what's going on.
Panel, thank you all very much. President Trump trying to turn the page on health care. He's inviting all 52 Senate Republicans to the White House for lunch today. The president raising eyebrows after saying that he should just let Obamacare fail. CNN's Suzanne Malveaux just spoke with a senator at the center of this debate. She is live on Capitol Hill. Give us the latest, Suzanne.
Hey, good morning, Allison. I just spoke to Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, one of the conservatives who's been a holdout in this, saying that it does not go far enough in repealing Obamacare because of taxes, subsidies, and regulations that are still intact. He believes that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's call for repealing Obamacare and waiting for replacement is a good one, at least a partial victory for conservatives who've been calling for a clean repeal of this. But they voted back in January, 51 out of 52 Republicans said yes to that bill, but it ultimately failed. And I pressed him on this because he said, well, maybe it'll take more time for them to change their minds. But there are 4 Republican senators who are dead set against this, and Senator Paul saying, well, perhaps there will be a political cost.
I think the vote will at least make them take a position. Right now, people are taking a position without a vote. A vote sometimes makes it a little more serious. And so I think if you were for repealing Obamacare and you're no longer for it, the people in your state deserve to know that.
And it really just underscores the incredible division here, the philosophical differences within the party themselves, that this is not likely going to change just over the weekend. Again, 4 Republican senators saying no, that they are not going to even move that particular part of the legislation forward. Chris.
All right, thank you very much, Suzanne. Appreciate it. So here's a question for you. What happens if President Trump gets his way? Will Obamacare fail? That's an important premise. We're going to ask a Republican governor next.
The president's latest plan for Obamacare, to let it fail. But Senate Republicans are moving forward with a plan to repeal Obamacare without a replacement. What does this mean on the state level? How are governors responding to everything that's transpired? Joining us to discuss is the Republican governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson. Good morning, Governor.
Hey, good morning. Great to be with you.
Great to have you. From where you sit, how do you think Congress and the White House botched this so badly?
Well, that's hard to say. That's a little bit of a process question, but we've been pushing that they listen to the governors because we've got the greatest level of experience in actually what's happening in our states. We've encouraged them for a number of months to make some changes in the Senate bill. Many of them were adopted, but in the end, it was hard to bring people together. The message that I have is they need to continue their path of reform, though, and not give up.
Let's talk about that, because it seems as though certainly the president is ready to wash his hands of this. It seems as though he's reached a dead end. Let me play for you what President Trump said about this yesterday.
We'll just let Obamacare fail. We're not going to own it. I'm not going to own it. I can tell you the Republicans are not going to own it.
Is that the answer, Governor? Wash his hands of it and let Obamacare do whatever Obamacare is going to do and walk away?
The people always hold political leaders accountable. And so we have a responsibility when we see problems to address them. When we see a system that's not working well, that's not affordable, they expect us to do something about it. It's hard for them to understand the complexities, the vote, why people can't come together on this, but you got to figure out a way to do it. And so it's not sufficient to say we're going to wash our hands of this. We've got to engage in it. And we're going to continue in Arkansas that path of reform we're already started on, because it's a cost to the states as well, and we don't want to make the Medicaid expansion portion an entitlement program. We want to reform it into a means and a safety net to help people move up the economic ladder.
Yeah, look, I know that you're looking for a work requirement for Medicaid, but back to the president. What would you say to the president? I mean, if you think that it's not satisfactory to let it fail and to leave people on the hook, why is the president using that tactic?
Well, I think he's trying to drive the message that he's frustrated that Senate was not able to come together on this, but I'll let him speak to that. More importantly, it's the Senate, and this is where I hope they do not give up, that they might have to let the dust settle here. But, you know, if there's 10 things that we want to do and you can bring 4 things to accomplish and reach consensus on it, let's go for those 4 things to fix what we have. Because right now we've got a cost problem for the federal government. We've got an access of insurance availability in multiple states.
Yeah.
So you just can't let this continue. You've got to work together, and I am hopeful that they will do that.
So you want to see them fix Obamacare rather than the vote they're having early next week to repeal it?
Well, I've always advocated that you need to repeal it because it's a bad system. Let's start over. But if you can't get anything done, then obviously you've got to reform it, because it's too costly. Again, there's not enough access. And so whatever you've got to do to set up a process that you can get the votes to change the status quo, that's what governing is about. I applaud our senators that have worked hard for good changes, but it fell apart on the left and the right. Hopefully they'll get back to the table and not give up. Just like in Arkansas, we're going to continue to work on this. Many of the states, if you don't do anything, the states will continue to ask for waivers on the exchange, waivers from the federal government to innovate in the states. And that's okay, but there's a better solution to have a national fix. Yeah. And that's what Congress obviously needs to address, while we continue to look at the states by state as to what works for our citizens.
Right, but just so I understand, you would be in favor of the vote early next week repealing it with no plan in place?
No, I've always said you need to have a direction as to where we're going. I want to be able to know. We don't need to create more uncertainty. Now, if they do a vote next week to repeal it, that's a good thing, as long as there's a path to get to a replacement that people have confidence in. Right now, I've said that we shouldn't go anywhere without a replacement plan because there's too much uncertainty in our health care system, and we've got to create some certainty and confidence in where we're going.
Okay, understood. Governor Asa Hutchinson, thank you very much for your perspective. You are obviously on the front lines, as are all of the governors. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Chris.
All right, so what is the way forward? President Trump is meeting with all of the Republican senators today to kind of figure out where their heads are and what comes next. But all of this effort for policy has a cloud over it, and that's the Russia investigation. In fact, the White House is defending a second undisclosed meeting with the president and Vladimir Putin that took place at a G20 dinner. What does that mean, this meeting? And what is the way forward for the Democrats on health care? We have a member of the Senate Intel Committee, a Democrat senator. So it turns out President Trump met a second time with Russian President Vladimir Putin. There was no U.S. official with him, and there was no record of what they discussed in this reportedly hour-long conversation at a G20 dinner. Is that okay? And what is the way forward on health care? Are the Democrats in control, as President Trump suggests? Let's discuss with Democratic Senator and former Governor of West Virginia, Joe Manchin. He is a member of the Senate Intel Committee. Senator, always good to see you.
Good to be with you, Chris.
The second meeting with Putin, we didn't know about it for a number of days. Do you have any concerns about this meeting?
Absolutely. It's very concerning, and it's something that we should know about. And to go into it so-called naked without any representative or any interpreter from our side, from the American side, is extremely troubling. And yeah, it's a concern. It most certainly is. But you know, this process is going to continue. Robert Mueller is going to do his investigation on everything, and I think we all have a bipartisan respect for Robert Mueller and doing his job, and we got to see what his findings are.
Do you have a larger concern about transparency and the simple fact of unknown when it comes to either President Trump or the people around him and any potential conflicts of interest or financial obligations to Russian-sourced money?
Well, let's talk about transparency first. Transparency in the public sector is much different than transparency in the private sector. When you're in the public sector, you have to gain the trust of the constituents and your people and everybody you represent, those that are for you and those that are against you. They don't have to agree with you, but they have to respect how you come to your decision, and in a transparent way, it makes it easier to respect that. That's what you build up in the public trust, and that's what's missing. And I think it's what we need to be working on. All of us have to be cognizant of that, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that everything that we do is in the open. And on intelligence committees, as you understand completely, Chris, there's certain things that we can't have open meetings because of people that we want to make sure that we protect.
Sure. And what do you make of the fact that the former head of government ethics says, you know, the Trump's lawyer didn't want him to sign his disclosure form certifying that it was accurate, and that we now know that people in this meeting with Don Jr., one of them was looked at by members of the Senate for moving money over $1 billion into different corporations, and that they seemed at a best read to want to work Don Jr. about Putin's money being tied up in sanctions revolving around the Magnitsky Act. All of these circumstantial things, do they matter, or is it just smoke?
And they matter. First of all, Carl Levin, former Senator Carl Levin from Michigan, is one of the most honorable people you're ever going to meet. Respected by everybody in this institution who ever served one day with him. So Carl has been, when he was here, that was...
President Trump will host a lunch with Senate Republicans today to discuss the path forward on health care. 4 Republican senators already say they will oppose a procedural vote to repeal Obamacare that is set for early next week. Let's discuss all of this with Republican Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota. He was previously the governor of that state. Senator, thanks for being here.
Appreciate the opportunity to visit with you.
When the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, pushes and holds that vote next week for whether or not just a straight up repeal of Obamacare, how will you vote?
Well, the first step will be to get on the bill, and that's the procedure vote you're talking about. I'll vote to proceed to the bill.
Okay, and then how would you vote whether or not to just repeal it flat out?
Well, we're not sure that that's what it will be, but if that is the vote, I would vote to repeal it with a delayed implementation so that we'd have a chance to actually make some changes. It won't fix the problems that are coming up between now and the end of the year, but it would be a step in the right direction to get to a final fix for the healthcare industries.
But just explain that to us, Senator. How, if you voted to repeal it now, where does that leave people?
The next step would be it would be exactly where they're at today. It would not change anything for a period of 2 years, which is not good news because this particular system right now is not working the way that it should. There will be a lot of people with increases of between 20 and 40% on their premiums beginning in the first of the year. It will not stabilize the markets, but it would give us 2 years in which to actually find some alternatives, Republicans and Democrats alike, so that we could actually fix this system that's in place today.
But that's awfully optimistic. I mean, you've had 7 years, quite frankly.
We don't have a choice. We have to fix what's currently in place. The system today, regardless of where you're talking with folks across the United States, their premiums have not gone down, they've gone up. But rather than focusing on what, it's a concern.
This is not over! Last year, protests and threats of boycotts erupted over a similar